Thank you so much for coming this morning. I'm Candice Benjes-Small. I am head of research at William & Mary Libraries.
And good morning, I'm Paul Showalter. I'm a research librarian and coordinator of instruction and assessment for William & Mary Libraries.
And our third collaborator is Mary Oberlies, who's instruction and research librarian at William & Mary, and she is attending other sessions right now. So our talk today is entitled The Un-usability Study, an Analysis of Access Problems Outside Libraries' Control. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you all. This proposal came from a very dark place. If we think back to 2020, it was an incredibly frantic, stressful, things coming at us right and left, things we didn't know what were happening. Everyone was scared for their job, for their family, for their health, for their institution. And 2021 was still pretty rough. And when I was thinking about a proposal, I was thinking about our daily existence of how every reference shift was mostly trying to put out fires, trying to rush order something because a professor needed it yesterday, trying to explain why something that worked last week didn't work this week, or why when I click on find full text, you get a blank page or you get caught in a loop, or it says we have it and we don't have it. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I felt like I was saying that all the time. I see some nods. And I also, as head of the department, felt really protective and frustrated that my colleagues were having that same experience. Every time we had a department meeting, there were a lot of tales of woe about how we were not doing what we wanted to do. We were mostly apologizing for things outside our control. And if I look at social media, here are just a few tweets from other librarians that show very similar sentiments, that people on the public service side were really just feeling like they were spending all their time trying to fix things or explain why things weren't working, even though it wasn't our fault. And so, dang it, I was going to list every problem that happened, and I was going to hold the vendors accountable and say, why aren't you fixing these things? Well, as we went through this study and as time has come by, it's a lot more nuanced than that. We have identified some issues and some recommendations, but I want you to know that I have backed off a bit and I'm not quite as angry as I was in June of 2021.
And I hope that we can all have that similar experience that Candice has, where we're kind of evolving toward a better place. You know, nothing that we talk about today is going to blow anybody's mind. Like you've probably all lived through the same experiences that we have, or shared those same experiences that we have. If we were painting a metaphorical picture of all this, your stories could be a brushstroke in this picture, I have no doubt. But what we really hope is that it makes you think about what comes next for all of us in our profession. That we can take that stress and that anxiety and that confusion that we felt, you know, day after day, week after week, month after month, for months on end, and in some ways we're still experiencing, how we can make sure that that's not in vain, right? How we can think about what it means and how we can move forward, and hopefully the next year and a half and beyond will be characterized more by empathy and stronger relationships and better communication. So that's what we, like Candice's experience, her shift, hopefully that'll happen for you too. But let's dive in, talk about a little bit about our methodology. We gathered data from several different streams, if you will. We did some semi-structured interviews with other librarians at other schools. There were two that were from the kind of a public facing side, research librarians like us, and then some folks kind of on the back end, behind the scenes, the e-resources folks. I think it was Kent, you interviewed those folks, and then we analyzed the notes from those interviews and kind of pulled out themes that bubbled up, and there were some common themes, and we'll talk about those in just a bit. We also looked at library statistics. So as you probably do in your libraries, we keep stats of all the questions that come in at our research desk, in person, email, phone, chat, all that. We have students who work at our research desk. We have librarians like myself and Candice who are backups to that. So any question that comes in, those get recorded. And we also keep internal IT request records. So some of those come from the front desk as well, but they oftentimes come directly from librarians and other people on the staff who are encountering some of these technical issues, database issues, vendor issues on the technical nature. And so we analyzed those requests for the time period of, I think it was March 13th of 2020 through September 1st of this year. So that was, yeah, there you go, March 13th, 2020, September 1st of this year. Yeah. So from all those things, actually what I want to show you really quick is, here's an example of our stats form. This is a spring share. You may be familiar with it. But you'll see over there under type of question, we keep track of the type, and that enabled us to do some good analysis on the types of questions. And this is our internal IT request form that shows, again, categorization of questions. You enter those, and then once you say create ticket, then you can enter a narrative about what's going on, do a screen capture, that sort of thing. So having it set up like this enabled us to really kind of do an analysis of the categories and the types of questions that we were getting. From all this data, from the interviews and the different sources of library statistics, we were able to discern 3 big themes. And so we're going to dive in and start sharing those with you now. The first would be the disconnect between systems. Another way of describing that, or an example of that, would be that library resources don't always play well together, right? So you think about your databases and your discovery layer, right? So do those things, do they match up very well? Can one thing get you directly to another thing? Here's a quote from one of our interviews. Whoops. One of our interviews, and you can see there, pull out the highlights of this, or the low light, if you will. One time it took me 17 tries to get to an article. And that's from the initial search. This is not really all that uncommon. This is a person in the profession who wanted to give up at 10. You can imagine what a student or a professor, what their experience would be like. Are they going to click? Are they going to give up at 10? No, they're probably going to give up at 1 or 2 if they don't get it, and they're going to move on. So that's what we mean by that. Another sentiment expressed by a librarian, and this goes back to the idea of, multiple times, multiple tries to try to get to something, multiple clicks. They're going to come to that front desk, they're going to chat us in and ask for help, but they don't really want to. They want to just be able to click and go right to it. Students and faculty don't want to have us intercede or slow down their process. They just want to boom, 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 get to their material. Another example of systems not playing well together, or the disconnect, would be when vendors discontinue coverage of a source. So this could be a journal, part of a package that we get that we would subscribe to, and over the course of time, some journals get added, some journals drop out of that package. Our system would be lagging behind. We don't know when those journals are gone. We don't know until somebody requests an article from that or clicks to try to get to an article in that journal that it might have disappeared. Along those same lines, or not discontinue necessarily, but we were in effect renting something and that rental period expired. So we see this a lot with our streaming media services, our streaming media databases that we subscribe to, where our license might be for a year or maybe even a semester. We don't keep a running tally of when those expiration dates are coming up. Who would? And the students don't know that that's coming up. A faculty member, a professor who has put a link to that film, that streaming film, on their syllabus last year, won't think to check to see whether it's expiring, that license is expiring, that rental period is ending. So they're going to have it on their syllabus, and they won't know there's a problem until the class goes to watch that thing and discovers that they can't get access, and then everybody's scrambling. So that's just a couple ways, a couple examples of types of things that happen. If I had to encapsulate that, the user experience for that, I would say that our users don't expect library resources to disappear. They're their sentiment or their thoughts on this from what we were able to gather and from just personal interactions with them. We know that they think once we have something, we will always have it. They don't, the idea that something would disappear from our collections for any reason is unacceptable or doesn't make any sense to them. Lastly, we also encountered issues with bad metadata. So this is another way that the discovery layer sometimes doesn't match up with what we have. Just for, we get packages of things from vendors, thousands upon thousands of records. That's a lot of metadata, a lot of room for error, a lot of room for mistakes. And so that shows up when we go to search for that stuff. We might have 4 records in our catalog, in our discovery layer, our discovery tool for a single book, for example, or for a single, journals change titles or that sort of thing. And the records don't end up reflecting that, which makes the search very confusing for our users. When I looked at the internal help tickets that had been submitted, there were about 450 of those over the time frame that we're talking about here. About half of those, so well over 200 of those tickets, were ones that were categorized as questions about access. So let me explain a little bit about what those mean and flesh that out a little bit. So most of the time, these questions about access came from our ILL folks wanting to know whether we had something or not. They had received an ILL request for it. So then if you want to trace that back a little bit, you can think, well, who would be submitting that? Well, that would be our students and faculty who went in and tried to search for something. And it looked like we had it, but they clicked it and they didn't get to it. So they're like, well, I'm not getting it here. I'm not getting that full text. I'm going to submit an ILL request for it and let the library figure it out, let the library work it out. So that's one dead end that someone has experienced through our systems. And then our own people, our own interlibrary loan folks go in and try to find that thing for the requester, and they can't figure out whether we have it or not. The discovery layer looks like we do. Our discovery tool says we do, but they can't get to it. So then they submit a help ticket about whether we do. So that was over 200 times in that time frame that we're talking about. Of those 200, about half the time, we in fact did not have that, whatever it was that they were looking for, although our discovery tool initially said that we did. So again, coming back to that bad metadata. I guess 50% of the time we did, but 50% of the time we didn't, and that is kind of unacceptable. All right, so for our next theme, I'm going to turn things back over to Candice.
So Paul talked about breakdown of communication between systems, but another theme was definitely about breakdown and communication between humans. One example was issues with vendor-vendor communication, where vendors within the same company talking to each other and where vendors of different companies willing to talk with each other. Librarian 3 talked about how vendors have different reps in the same company and how she would contact her vendor rep and say, hey, this isn't working. And they would say, well, it's working just fine elsewhere, so it must be your library. When in fact, then a couple weeks later, she got contacted by the vendor. Oh, wait, yes, actually, it is more widespread. But the very initial pushback was, it must be you, it can't be us. Another librarian talked about how no one in the vendor world wants to take responsibility at times. So vendor number 1 points the finger at vendor number 2, and vendor number 2 says vendor number 1 is the problem. And again, then the librarian saying, where do I go from here? Why can't vendor 1 and vendor 2 just talk to each other and work this out? Another issue with communication is that the message sent is not always the message received. And this is especially true of vendor and librarian messages sent to the user. As Paul talked about, users have a very clear idea in their mind of what libraries are. And so no matter what we say, that's very hard to override that image of libraries. For example, vendors were incredibly gracious to give us access to all kinds of textbooks, the emergency access to textbooks in March, April, May. People had gone home for spring break, left their textbooks in the dorm. The publishers said, we understand that, we're opening up the copyright, and here are lots and lots of textbooks that are available for right now. And all over our library sites, we had posted for right now. But of course, that access disappeared, but faculty and students were shocked, horrified, Pikachu faced. What do you mean it went away? It was going to be there forever, right? As Librarian 2 said, people assumed emergency access would be ongoing despite our warnings. It would not. After all, the emergency has continued. And once again, circling back to the idea that users don't think of libraries the same way we do. This also points out that they don't understand all the different layers that we have to make work in order to allow access. So from Librarian 1, we have the example of students don't understand that they have to go through the library's webpage in order to not hit the payroll. Why can't they just go through Google? And I have total sympathy with that. If I'm on social media and someone links to a Chronicle article and I click on it and I go, oh no, wait, now I have to back up, go to the library page, log in that way, and then I can see the full text. It's really frustrating and annoying. Why can't I just log in with my William & Mary ID like I can for like the Washington Post and get straight there? And why is it that I can for some and not others? There's also the disconnect between what librarians want and what users want. So vendors sell library databases to librarians, and librarians want super sophisticated, highly nuanced tools, but users just want to find things. And so we also have this problem where the more we want, the more the tool reflects what librarians want, the less user-friendly it can become, and that can lead to lots of frustrations when it comes to accessing things online. All of this led to a pretty grim view of vendors from librarians, and I think it's important to be honest about it. There's a feeling in our profession, not by everyone, it's not universal, but there is a feeling that I think we need to think about addressing. And the feeling is that we're coming from different places. There's cooperations, but vendors need to profit in order to exist. They have shareholders. The focus is on new sales, not updated benefits. And a lot of this is really true, right? They need to make money. They are not a nonprofit in most cases. But there is definitely a feeling that they do not want to fix what they have. They just want to sell new products. And I think that is something that is really problematic. If it's true, that's problematic. If it's not, and we think that way, that is also problematic. So Paul is going to talk about the impact.
Newsflash, it wasn't pretty, right? You all lived through this, you know. If I had to characterize it another way other than the impact not being pretty, I would say that all these things combined basically were death by 1,000 cuts, right? If any of these things had happened in isolation, one here, one there, it would have been normal, right? But everybody goes home, all the students go home, all the faculty are remote, and they're all trying to use these electronic resources, and it's just this constant barrage of issues like we've talked about here today. And from our side, librarians are feeling like we need to compensate, or I would even go so far as to say oftentimes apologize for our systems and the products that we use. Because, again, students, as Candice and I both have addressed, students and faculty don't understand all the complexities of it. They just want to get their information. We understand that. And so we're feeling the need to try to compensate with things like tutorials, which who even knows if they're getting used, or apologize for those mistakes. And we try to be empathetic, right? From one of our interviews, one of our interviewees said, they recognize they're working with great people who are behind the scenes trying to get all these things fixed. And I would even extend this to vendor land, right? They're working behind the scenes too. When we reach out to them for help, they're working to get it fixed. They're doing the best they can. So library people behind the scenes, on the front lines, our vendors, other forms of support, they're all doing the best they can. But it was just one issue after another, and it does start to wear a person out.
The pandemic really brought into focus the digital divide that we have been talking about and presenting about and writing about forever, but this really brought clear how much a problem it is. Library resources like databases, they work really great if you are on campus on a hardwired connection that gives you super fast internet, that you have the most up-to-date browser that can handle all kinds of scripts or pop-ups. And if you are on a laptop with a big screen, that all works really well. But in fact, especially during the pandemic early times when everyone was working from home, this was not true. Even now, we have students who are remote who do not have access to the technology they would have if they were on campus. Even some of the librarians we interviewed talked about living in a rural area and trying to do really complicated, complex, bandwidth intensive tasks from home over satellite internet. It's not pretty. And even just this week, we had a colleague who tried to access one of our databases, and she said, there's no find full text in the mobile interface. I can see the abstract, but there's no find full text button on my screen. Librarians talked about how they had students who were trying to do everything on their mobile phones, that they were sharing a laptop with their siblings, and so they had very limited amount of time that they could use, that they were on laptops that they had gotten in high school through some kind of grant and were desperately outdated. Librarians talked about creating maps of free Wi-Fi spots around town. Often public library and McDonald's were the only places that they could access that. And I mean, our hearts have to break about thinking about taking your phone over to the McDonald's parking lot, trying to get to its Wi-Fi, and then trying to do a database search. And I'm thinking just like JSTOR, every time you pull it up, then you have to wait for the little box that says, do you agree to the copyright before I allow you to actually open up the document? Like every window is so time intensive and so painful. And so we really think it's way past due time to have some serious conversations about the demands that our resources put onto technology. And of course, the students are really frustrated by their experiences, not just from the technology demands, but how wonky and kludgy they can be. Librarian 2 said, if you have 7 options for full text, this is what our discovery layer does. You click on find full text and sometimes it says ABIN form, academic search complete, tells you all the wonderful paths you could take. But then the first 3 don't work. Now, as librarians, we'll probably go through all 7, but the student who hits this probably will give up, either because they think, I must be doing something wrong, it can't be this bad, or they think, I don't have time to do this, or they think, this tool is just bad. I don't need to use this tool. So the end result is that because library resources don't play well with each other, it pushes students back to what they knew before, which is Google. Why don't they just use Google and Google Scholar? Why would they bother using all of these resources if they're not going to work? It undermines everything that we've been working for years, trying to get them to use the resources and put the information literacy into practice. But if the tools don't work, why would they bother? So we tried to end on a happy note. What are our takeaways from this study? What recommendations can we put forth? The first, again, is the focus on the users. Librarians, when we're picking databases, we have to think not only about our needs, but what users need, and ask the vendors, what usability studies have you done? Or what usability studies can we do? And give the information back to the vendors. And vendors need to be a lot more transparent if they are doing usability studies, what users they are using in order to create these interfaces.
We'd also recommend improved troubleshooting. And that could take multiple forms, but I think a couple ways that it comes to my mind are to have, as we mentioned earlier, vendors talking to each other more, vendors from different platforms, different companies talking to each other more instead of pointing fingers, to kind of collaborate, if you will, to solve problems. Another way that we could do this would be to have vendors on library listservs. So There are lots of library listservs where we will post issues that we're dealing with to kind of crowdsource a solution from our peers. It'd be great if vendors were on those listservs with us and engaging in conversations and raising their awareness of the issues that we're facing kind of on a day-to-day basis as they come up. Now, if I look at myself, our focus, our gaze inward, there's work that we can do as librarians. I don't want to put everything in the lap of the vendors. Speaking for myself, I could be in better contact with our vendors. I get lots of emails from our vendors saying they're coming to visit. They're coming to the library. Can they sit down and do a demo of a product with me or me and my colleagues? Can they just take me to lunch or something like that? And I'll be honest with you, I summarily delete those emails almost all the time. I do this because I like to think that I'm really busy and really important and too busy to listen to a sales pitch, right? I have too much important work to do to be listening to a sales pitch. But doing this research, working on this project has made me rethink that maybe they are sales pitches. Maybe they are demos for a product that I probably won't be interested in. But what they really are at their heart is an opportunity to engage, an opportunity to have a conversation, to share my concerns, and have them listen and have a dialogue. So I am committing here and now to being better about engaging with the vendors when they reach out.
And on a bigger systemic level, I think that we need to reflect on our culture and how stressed we are and how stressed we're getting. Julie Glassman and Meredith Farkas have written a lot about slow librarianship, growing out of the slow food movement, the idea that we need to step back and slow down and reevaluate our values and what it is that we are trying to accomplish. And one of the ideas is that capitalism drives competition. And I feel like the pandemic really reflected that well, where there was a lot of finger pointing, a lot of just so much stress and so much feeling like it needs to be done now. It has to be done right now. I think that for faculty, staff, and students, the slow culture would be for them to accept that having a library resource available right now and then is not, in 99.9% of cases, a life or death. Everything must drop and you must fix this now. People, again, they were surrounded by all kinds of things, which meant their resilience was really low. I don't mean to take that away at all. And we're still dealing with it. People's resilience is still really low. But I think that means that everyone needs to think about how we can recapture a more humane way of communicating with each other. I think administrators have to back up their librarians so that when faculty do throw a tantrum, that the administrators have the librarians' backs rather than saying make the faculty member happy. I think that vendors need to think about ways that they can sell their products without talking badly about other vendors' products, and think about how they can work together in order to create the best products to sell the librarians. So most of all, I hope that we find better ways to collaborate and cooperate with each other. So we have a little bit of time. Welcome any questions, or if you would like to share your battle story. The microphone, I'm assuming we want to capture that in if we're recording this. Yes, yes. Anyone, comments, questions? Oh, yes.
We can get that. We don't have that for this particular project. You're right. The person who asked the question would be right. 1 out of 500 would be, certainly reasonable if that were the case. But it's hard to say whether that is the case. Also, when our dead ends, when the students and faculty aren't getting to that full text repeatedly, day after day, month after month, that's when we start to notice. But yeah, you're right. 1 out of 500, I wouldn't complain about that. Question in the middle, Liz.
Hi. Well, for me, all roads lead to Google Scholar, whether good or bad. But my question is, I started off with federated searches where your discovery tool would actually go out and search the other databases. And now we've moved to discovery tools with central indexing that is, no one knows what's in that, just like no one knows what's in Google Scholar. They say what's there, but is it really there? And how deep is the metadata? And then you have that interstitiary page with like all those full text options, why I don't know, but well, I kind of know, but whatever. And so is it maybe that discovery tools, just like we found federated searches, really don't work? And we need to go back to searching in the individual databases, which I get why we don't want to do that. And then I'm like back to Google Scholar, but if our discovery tools in our institution right now is looking at reevaluating our discovery tool and looking at others, and we're not really impressed with any of them. So just like we left federated, is discovery really the answer?
I would say yes, and you might be thinking too much like a librarian in that we want it to work every time and we get really mad that it won't do everything it wants. And yet if you show user a discovery tool or a federated search, there's no going back. Study after study shows once they see how easy it is, they're not going to get everything. They're going to get most things. They're going to pick most things versus doing a harder route where they get everything. So that I would say that we need to give them lots of options, but the idea that we can go back to, we have 500 databases, you choose the one you want, and then if that doesn't work, you try another. I don't think that's coming back. One of our interviews talked about how for him, the pandemic really showed how quickly people forget information literacy skills. He talked about faculty he's worked with for 20 years and how we used to have to like print index and look things up. And he would talk to them, remember how we have to like find the journal and then you go through it. And the professor was like, no, I click find full text and the article comes up. What do you mean? Like they're very resistant to going back. So I think that in general, our users are fine with most. They're still going to alert us or be upset when it doesn't work, but they are, I would be very surprised if very many are willing to take a step back and do something harder for a higher accuracy. What do you think, Paul?
I would agree. Yeah, once you start down that road, there's no going back. And yeah, I think that sums it up really well. The genie's out of the bottle on that one.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean,
As the students often are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love Google Scholar too. We have a huge history department, which puts a lot of premium on primary sources. And that's the one area where Google Scholar is not very helpful quite yet. Yes, sir.
Hi, this is great.
Thank you.
You've touched on really many of this. There should be more presentations or, articles on this stuff. Because I've got, we have a lot of scars on this, even in the older times with the beginning of the internet, where you have older resources, but they change from a publisher, or a transfer, or a dashboard contract with a European publisher, and the plug was pulled. It's changed, and the vendor rep doesn't even know about it, which is not their fault, not the blaming, but when you're doing the e-resource position, it's often you can be, quote, blamed by other users and librarians that want everything perfect, because that's what you're right. That things are going to be perfect. I don't want to go on and on, but my experience, I think, excuse me, like the IT departments understand much of this. And they tell me it's not just libraries, it's many, many things within the IT community of technology. So, maybe we could talk later. You should do a book on it or something like that.
Oh, you're talking to the right person.
No, you really, it's very good. But because some of this, with much of us, it's like, ILL department, and of course, having managed one and started one up for like 15 years, of course, people want things yesterday, and it starts off on a negative track to begin with, right? Because the user needed it. And then when you run into these things and the catalog is wrong, and that's no one's fault, but like you alluded to in the beginning, where the coverage is not accurate or it looks like it's still ongoing. So, and I don't want to go on, but that was excellent.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights, your experience.
Yeah, it reminded me of a story from one of the librarians I interviewed. They moved from a self-hosted easy proxy to hosted easy proxy, but somehow in the transition, none of the new IP ranges were delivered to the vendors. And so she was forced to contact every vendor and give them the new IP. And it happened the first day of classes. And so she started that, and she just was finishing up with the last vendors when I interviewed her in mid-October. And that was what she was spending 80 to 90% of her time doing. And what sped it up finally was she mentioned it on a listserv, and someone related to IP addresses. There's some organization, is that right? E-resources people that deal with IP. And he was like, I have never heard, I don't know what went wrong, but we'll fix this, we'll help you. And they stepped in. So it was one of those where when she reached out, she obviously talked to the person who did not know there could be help. And once she got in contact with them, there was a lot of help. But talk about death by 1,000 cuts, trying to get all that done. And she said, and of course, that's when you find out your vendor list is not up to date, or that all the reps you have left.
Any other questions? Great.
Hi, I'm curious how you communicate about these problems with your patrons and how that may have changed as a result of your research.
Go ahead, Paul.
We both have feelings on this, I'm sure. I mean, aside from continuing to apologize, almost as a reflex, a lot of times, and build products to try to ease their pain a little bit, like those tutorials. But I feel like at least the students and faculty that we work with, our end users, they are willing to show us a lot of grace. They want what they want that product, but they understand just because everybody's life is hard right now, they understand that they might have to wait, and that they're not going to come down too hard on anyone. I don't know. What would you say?
I would say that coming from the head of the department level, I have throughout, our research is just finishing up, so it's not influenced so much by the research as much as our experience. But I pushed hard on administrators to back us up when we told faculty no. And that is, different levels of no are available on different campuses. William & Mary, the faculty are pretty powerful. And so like one simple thing we did early on was when we were all off campus in the spring of 2020 and only offering service through IM, we put in an automatic notice like, we're all working from home, we thank you for your time, because people were losing their minds when they would type something and there wouldn't be an immediate reply. And so we put that in, and just having that discussion in public services leadership, I thought was important, and we found a lot of people were. And so I felt it was really important to support my team. And we had a number of talks within our team about the stress and frustration and what they could do. Like, you can walk away. You can end, if someone is being rude to you, you can end the chat. And I always tell them, if a professor or a student is not treating you with grace, you can forward it to me and I will handle it. So I think something that was somewhat effective, and I think, but super important at all times, but especially through this, was to emphasize that you do not have to be treated badly, no matter what. Even if it was our fault, you do not get to be treated badly. That we are We are collaborators. These are our coworkers. These are our colleagues, and they need to treat you with the respect you treat them.
We'll say that fortunately, we didn't encounter too many instances. There were very few and far between actually where we had to walk away from a situation or close off a chat because it had gotten out of hand. Excuse me, like rude or anything like that. That did happen, but those instances were quite rare.
Well, that is the end of our time. So thank you so very much for coming to our session this morning. We hope you have a wonderful conference. And Paul and I are here if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.